Warning, this video contains multiple scenes with flashing lights, which may trigger photosensitive epilepsy. These scenes will be telegraphed via text and contain timestamps to skip these scenes. Viewer discretion is advised. Hey everyone, Road Breach here, and today we're taking a look at Mighty Morphin Power Rangers on the Super Nintendo. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is a side-scrolling beat-em-up developed by Natsume and published by Bandai for Super Nintendo and Game Boy on November 23rd, 1994. I figured since we're still waiting for Rita's Rewind, I could talk about the first Power Rangers game that North America ever got. Not the first one ever made, but the first one to come stateside. There was a Sega Genesis version to come out around this time, but it was a fighting game and a Game Gear version that was pretty much the same thing. This is the furthest I've gone back for a review subject to date, and I'm pretty happy that I get to do so as an avid fan of AVGN. So, does this game hold up after 30 years? Well, let's prepare for Morphin time and see what this game has to offer. Let's take a brief look at the hardware first. The look of this thing is pretty simple. It's a light gray box with some purple buttons, but I like how there's some raised areas for important parts like the cartridge slot and the controller ports, which connect to the power and reset buttons. And there's a little light on the front to tell you it's on, the cartridge slot has a spring-loaded door to keep dust out, and the eject button that'll push the cartridge out, which isn't entirely necessary. The controller has a similar layout to modern controllers of today, but it only has one L and R button and no joysticks. Since Bluetooth didn't exist back then, the controller has a wire that's about 7.5 feet long. And as I alluded to, the games came on cartridges. And I do like how these things have segments on the sides to add some visual flair to the cartridge. And the label on this game looks pretty nice. The shading on the Rangers and logo is done pretty well, and the Rangers are rendered nicely. Alright, on to the game. Can't do that on an emulator now, can ya? The game's graphics are very appealing for the time. The SNES was only capable of 256 colors, with 16 colors per sprite, but even with those limitations, the game manages to do great things with what it has. The game has a semi-cartoony art style with the backgrounds, in that a lot of the game is rendered with bright colors and some pretty exaggerated details, but they have nice shading to help everything stand out. One thing that helps give this game some depth is the parallax backgrounds that will scroll differently to how you move through the stage. While it may not be a complex technique by today's standards, it helps add some visual flair to this game. The characters are also given a cartoony look as well, though they do look pretty accurate to their show counterparts, but I have to say that Zack looks really weird. Put simply, I don't feel he was rendered all that tastefully. While the putty patrollers were only gray in the show, the developers made different color putties to indicate how they'll attack. It does take liberty with the source material, but it helps make the game more fair and add some variety to the enemies. The bosses are also pretty accurate to their show appearances. However, another thing about the visuals that bugs me is that all the Rangers look the same in Ranger form, just colored differently, which is not the case in the show because all the Rangers had different helmets, and of course the Rangers in civilian form have different body types, whereas they all have the same body type in Ranger form. I'm told that this is most likely due to limited space for data, seeing as how Super Nintendo games had pretty limited storage compared to games of today. As for audio, there are a few sound effects the game uses a lot. It can only play one sound effect at a time because the other audio channel is taken up by the music. So if you get one sound to play, then it'll interrupt a sound that's already playing. But the attack sounds are pretty good, so it does make the combat pretty satisfying. As for the music, it uses one tone for each instrument that it shifts up and down to produce the soundtrack. The music the game has isn't my jam, but it does fit the game well, being done in the style of 90s rock. It does sound like something that I'd hear in the show, and the theme song on the title screen even sounds pretty good, even having vocals, which is something that a lot of games typically didn't have. So even though the hardware is pretty limited, the game's presentation is still pretty good for the most part. But how does the game play? Power Rangers is a side-scrolling beat-em-up. You run to the right, enemies spawn, you beat them up, and you proceed until you get to the boss. You get a choice between one of the 5 Rangers: Trini, Billy, Jason, Kimberly, and Zack. Each ranger does handle a little differently from one another in terms of movement speed, damage output, and technique. Some standouts would be Billy having a flurry for damage per second, Trini and Kim having more range, Zach has a helicopter kick that can cover your 12 and 6, and Jason hits like a truck. Thanks, Prime. No problem. Each ranger can also throw the enemy, which can hit their friend if there's one behind them. And everyone can do a jump kick, which can knock the enemy to the ground pretty easily. Later in the level, you morph into ranger form, and every time you attack, you use the appropriate power weapon specific to your ranger. The two weapons that have the most obvious difference would be the power lance that has a DPS attack, much like Billy's flurry, and the bow has a ranged attack that does piddly damage. But the other weapons do have good overhead attacks. However, I'm not crazy about the throw not having any range when morphed. Some stages also have throwable objects that you can hit enemies with. And each ranger has a screen-clearing bomb attack that is very likely to cause seizures if you're sensitive to flashing lights. The game also has a few different healing items in the form of health kits and turkey legs, and morphing can restore health as well. But you have 3 lives as a safety net, and if you lose all your lives, you're given the option to restart the stage from the beginning. There's more that I could talk about, but let's talk about the levels right now. I won't talk about the story, namely because there's pretty much no context given in the game for what's happening. Obviously, if you were a fan of Power Rangers back in the day, you would have watched the show to know what happens, but I do wish that there was at least an overarching plot in the game conveyed via text boxes or something. Stage 1 is downtown Angel Grove. This stage is literally straightforward, and you deal with gray putties that go down in one hit, purple putties that can take more abuse, and green putties that like to ascend to jump kick you. There are also brown putties that I didn't learn what they did until later on. And there are some drones that can drop bombs. Once you get to the end of the stage, you have a boss fight with Bones. Bones has a sword that he'll use to do a straight jab which you can duck under, a wave attack that you need to jump over, and he'll jump all over the room to make himself harder to hit. Phase 2 has Bones losing his arms, but he'll gain a fireball, and now he's more mobile than he was before. Phase 3 has Bones reduced to a floating head. He still has his fireball, but now he's harder to hit. I should also mention that this game gives you a password after every stage that you can write down and enter in the options menu to pick up from the stage you left off. Yeah, this was very common for games back in the day. Some games did have save points, but most of them required a password in order to save your progress. Stage 2 is the Industrial District. This stage starts off by ambushing you with putties that drop from the trees, as well as there being turrets in the trees that you can destroy. This stage introduces shield putties that take more abuse than purple ones, and patina putties that have flails. This stage also has rolling oil drums that you need to jump over, these spiked tread things that you can destroy, drones that shoot down, flame jets, and falling pipes that you need to watch out for. This is also where the game introduces platforming. You have a decent amount of influence on your trajectory after you jump, but you can't jump as high as Mario, despite the show proving otherwise. There are platforms with bars that you can grab by pushing up on the D-pad, which you can get on top of by pressing up again. But some of these platforms will be out of reach to where you need to jump off the wall in order to grab the bar. And you can also descend from the platforms by holding down and pressing the jump button, which is something that a lot of games didn't see fit to have despite needing this feature. When you get to the end of the stage, you have a fight with Gnarly Gnome. Gnarly Gnome will teleport around the room and launch a projectile at you that you can interrupt by hitting him. He can use his rake as a melee weapon, and he'll intermittently play his concertina, which will send out a shockwave. Gnarly also has a second phase where he'll blink around your position and use one of his attacks that gives you a short window to hit him. Stage 3 is the Sewer. This stage has spiders that'll spit at you, which you can kill, and drones that have drills under them, which will drop down and try to hurt you. The game also has these electrified I don't know what's that will damage you, but you can destroy them. This stage has some annoyances in the form of flame jets that will go on and off, which the game pairs up with drones that you end up needing to wait in order to attack, as well as water that rises up and down, which makes you unable to fight enemies. And you can't jump onto platforms if you're in the water either, neither can you pull yourself up. This stage is just annoying. I don't like it. Thankfully, we can stop thinking about this stage because we now have a fight with iGuy. iGuy has a beam attack that you can duck under and jump over depending on if he's ducking or standing. And he'll intermittently pounce on you and throw eyes at you. Phase 2 has iGuy turning into a single floating eye, which makes him harder to hit, and he'll fire a projectile at you every now and then. Stage 4 is the Skyscraper. This stage has chandeliers that will fall down and hit you if you walk under them, which you can avoid, drones that you just can't hit, which can also hit the putties, and turrets that you can destroy. And it's here where I learned the brown putties can throw knives. This stage also has an elevator ride that has obstacles you need to avoid, as well as putties that have straight up machine guns. Yeah, these putties are straight up packing heat. This stage has a mini-boss with a drone that will fly under the platform if you don't kill it quickly, so I just end up using the bomb attack to take it out. Yeah, I can play dirty too, tailpipe! I also couldn't help but notice this stage has a familiar set of buildings in the background, which puts into perspective the time this game was made in. Rest in peace. Alright, let's think of something a little more lighthearted. Like the boss of this stage, Genie. Genie will throw knives at you that will come one after the other, he'll send out these mirrors to reflect light at you, he has electrical serpents that will fly at you that you can avoid, he has these fireballs that'll come down at you, and a flame belch that comes down at an angle, and while he does all this, he'll switch which side of the room he's on to do these attacks. Stage 5 is the cave hideout. This stage has light blue putties carrying swords, drones that will carpet bomb you, it brings back the rolling oil drums, it has laser turrets, and has more gun-toting putties. This stage also has a laser that will fire every 4 seconds, but luckily there are plenty of safe zones where you can take refuge until it stops firing, and it can kill the putties that spawn here. And you also get an ample sound warning just before it fires so you can avoid it. You can eventually get to the laser and destroy it to proceed, where you find Dark Warrior is this stage's boss. Dark Warrior will blitz across the room and hit you with his katana, teleport, and drop a bomb on you from above. His second phase is where he gets out what looks to be a Takumi Tobo, where he has more range, but you can duck underneath it. Stage 6 is the first stage where you get to control the Megazord. These last 2 stages are where the game goes from a beat 'em up to a fighting game. First Megazord fight has you pitted against Mutitis. You can dash forward or back by double tapping either direction, and if you hit the attack button while you're dashing forward, you can deal a devastating blow against your opponent. Beyond that, you can also launch normal melee attacks that you can direct by holding up or down on the D-pad, and you have a power bar that'll charge up on its own, and it dictates which ranged attack you can use depending on how much it's charged. One drawback is that you need to make sure your opponent isn't going to hit you because attacks are a little slow, which can leave you open for an attack. Anyway, what about Mutitis? What's he like? Mutitis has extending claws that can hit you from a good distance, a burp attack that will linger and damage you if you walk into it, whether it be airborne or on the water, and a rapid-fire crystal attack, and 2 breath attacks. He'll jump around the battlefield a lot and take pot shots at you whenever he sees an opening. Though once you figure out what you're doing, he's pretty easy to take down. But the final boss, Cyclopsis, is a whole different machine. He has an energy ball attack that can go high and low that you need to watch for, a missile attack that you need to block, a slide kick, and some basic melee attacks. He also has a shield that can absorb energy from your ranged attacks. There are times when he'll spam his energy balls, which can really mess you up if you don't pay attention to where they're coming from. And he'll definitely take advantage of the situation if you switch positions on the arena. And just as soon as you think he's done for, he powers up for phase 2 and wrecks you hard if you're too worn down. He still has the attacks he had before, but now he has a big energy ball that'll drain a ton of your health if you don't block it. To sum up this fight with 1 point, I have a ton of footage of just this fight alone. The only way to beat him is to forget that the Megazord is a machine and treat it as an extension of your body. Let the power of the grid flow through your body like the blood that already inhabits it, and only then will you stand victorious. And damn did this feel satisfying. The game ends with the Rangers riding into the sunset, then it cuts to the Rangers having a dance party at the juice bar from the show. Yeah, Zach, bust a move, man! I also like that Ernie, Bulk, and Skull make cameos. And after the credits, you get some codes. What are these for?
These codes are for the Megazord battles that you can play with a friend if you have another controller.
Ah, that's pretty neat. And if you're wondering, the game can be beaten in a little under 50 minutes. It did take me longer because of the Cyclopsis boss fight, but the game is still pretty short, though it was the early 90s, so I can cut it some slack for that. Overall, this game is pretty good. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers on Super Nintendo is a fun beat-em-up that has decent enemy variety and solid combat. The game does have some mechanical and visual issues, but I still believe this game is worth checking out if you like Power Rangers and retro games. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching and gotta zoom.